Shabbat shalom, everyone. We're gathered today on the 16th of the 11th month on our Creator's calendar as we comprehend it, which happens to line up with January 24th, 2026 on the Gregorian calendar. And we're continuing with our study of the book of Devarim or Deuteronomy, which is really a recap from Moshe of everything that they went through during their wilderness journey before he passes away and the children are taken into the promised land by Yahushua the son of Nun. This all transpired on the 40th or in the 40th year in the 11th month, I believe. It started in the 11th month um, when he was speaking to them here. But we're currently on chapter 16, which covers the feast of the Pesach of weeks of tabernacles, how every male must offer as he is able at these three feasts, and of the judges and justice, groves and images are forbidden. Now, we don't quite get, we don't know how they use groves all the time. There was different means of it, but the idea of using trees in veneration or worship is to be prohibited, right? And images are prohibited, something that we ought to take heart to. But 16 says, observe the month of Abib. It says new here. And then if you look over here, it will say Abib. Abib means to be tender green or the ear, right? It says, observe the month of Abib, and you shall sacrifice the Passover to Yahuwah your Elohim, because in the month of Abib you came out of Egypt by night. And you shall sacrifice the Passover to Yahuwah your Elohim, sheep and oxen, in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose to have his name called upon it. So here you can sacrifice of the flock and of the herd, and that is for the ox. This isn't directly saying you had to have a lamb anymore for this specific observance, which I find interesting. But if this is accurate, which you have no doubt to believe it, this is just another example of his word changing the way that he keeps his appointed times, but not changing the fact that he has an appointed time he wants you to keep. The times are for ages and ages unto all your generations, as he said, but how he wants us to observe them has fluctuated and changed over time. This is absolutely uncontestable. It's not even a controversy, but people make this into a big thing when they say that Elohim can't change and what he says is forever and his laws never change. They delude themselves when they say such things. This is a perfect example. If you go back to the original instructions that were kept for the Pesach, it was when Abraham was told to take Yitzhak and offer him. And he went for 3 days and found the mountain of Elohim and went the mountain where Yahuwah would provide. And he took him up, went to offer, and his hand was stayed by the messenger of Yahuwah, who says, "Now I know that you'll serve me." He really would be obedient and love him. And the contrast, which we as a people don't see the severity of the contrast so clearly. It looks like it's an oddity to us. But if you recall, there is a foretelling all the way from the beginning that the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent and crush the head of the serpent, right? And the promised seed would come. The idea of the firstborn and the Redeemer and all these things was in the heavenly tablets. They were written down. The messengers knew it. And Satan would try to do what he could to pervert, to twist, to change things, or to thwart and prevent. One of the things is he likes to claim all the veneration and the worship that Elohim would have for himself. So if a man would be willing to do such a thing for Elohim, then he must do it for the adversary, right? And where the murder of your firstborn would be an affront to our Creator because the firstborn is set apart to Him. It's required by the enemy. And that's something that you had in pagan rituals all over. It was a contrivance of the enemy in whatever fashion or form. It's not something that we need to focus on, but it's the fact that it happened and it's contrary to the truth, right? So because Kronos had done these things beforehand, it was seen that Abraham was likewise obedient in all things. He would do such. And that was really a contrast that you would parallel with that nobody actually talks about that I'm familiar with. But it was a refutation of such things. It was him saying, don't, for everybody that has a reasonable mind. However, that was the first Passover. And then it was kept as a festival, a commemoration, a remembrance by Abraham. When the children were keeping it, it was lost and then it was reinstituted in Egypt. And it was different from when Abraham kept it. It was not in the same place, it was in Egypt. They had instructions to put blood on a door. They had to share a lamb with other families, and it was very specific instructions to do certain things that you have nowhere else. Everything else is done in a remembrance of such things or as a changed thing later in remembrance of these, the echo of it, if you will. But the pattern is the days don't change, how you keep it does. And that happened twice, Abraham, then the Exodus. Now you have another way of keeping it when they come into the land, where they're keeping it with the witness of the tabernacle. And then you have the instructions on how to keep it when they have the temple built and how it's only permitted to have it in that one location from that point on. So that's four different ways you have just keeping this one feast in his words. You might reject the book of Yobelim and not consider it legitimate. Even so, in the Bible itself, you have multiple ways that this is told to be kept, as you can see right here. This is number two. You have the way it's kept in the land and how it's not to be done elsewhere anymore, which is obviously different from the way they kept it here and the way it was kept in Egypt. But my point in showing these is just to say that his words are eternal, the things that he establishes, and this is why Shaul says the circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but guarding the commands of Elohim is what matters. And the fact that he's changed what he says over time is what we're supposed to be studious scholars of his word about, like good money changers, as it mentions in the recognitions. Um, but that's for a different time. To continue here, we're in verse 3. Or actually, we'll put it on verse 2 again. It says, and you shall offer or sacrifice the Passover to Yahuwah your Elohim, sheep and oxen, in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose to have his name called upon it. You shall not eat leaven with it. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread, or unleavened with it, bread of affliction, because you came forth out of Mitzrayim or Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day of your coming forth out of the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. So the point of eating the bread without the chametz there, or without the leaven, is to remember that they came out in haste. And if you recall, we read this not too long ago, when they came out that night, the 14th night, and then they were free on the 15th, that first day. They left before their bread had risen. The dough was not risen yet. And when they baked it, it was unleavened. And they were to eat that way for 7 days, which is what they did. They ran out of their stores, and then they were provided with the manna by the time the second month came, and it was the 17th day of the second month. The the very same day that the floods had happened, and you go back further, that was the very same day that the serpent deceived Hua in the garden. That was the day that he rained the bread of messengers down for his people's benefit. In the wisdom of Shalomo, or the Chokmah Shalomo, the wisdom of Solomon, it talks about the contrast between how In the ways that he corrected and chastised and punished his enemies, in the same ways he benefits his people. And he gives a contrast between the plagues of Egypt and the things that happened in the wilderness. But you can see it also with the flood, with the sin that entered in and the flood, and how he rained down the manna from the Shamayim there. Although the true manna from the heavens is the one who gives everlasting life, as we know. It says, leaven shall not be seen with you in all your borders for 7 days, and there shall not be left of the flesh which you shall sacrifice at evening on the first day until the morning. You shall not have power to sacrifice the Passover in any of the cities which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you, but in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose to have his name called there, you shall sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the setting of the sun, at the time when you came out of Egypt. And all of these things were explained by Irenaeus as Moshe foretelling the very time and place of our Mashiach's death. Right? As a foreteller, setting up these things so that, and foretelling the very events, another witness to the fact that he was our Passover, as it plainly says in the renewed covenant, and he did not eat the Passover before becoming it. There is a modern error that's being promoted, even among people who are keeping what they call the Zadok calendar, where they think that the Hashmoneans, the Maccabees, went apostate in keeping the calendar. The Maccabees were foretold in Yechezkiel as the ones who did not go astray of the sons of Zadok. They were the sons of Phinehas, and they were the ones that kept the truth when all the others went astray. And it says, and they shall serve him the fat and the blood, which they literally did in becoming the high Kohen, the ones chosen of the sons of Aharon to serve him because they stayed true. Literally fulfilling the foretellings in the microcosm there. The fullness of that fulfillment will be during the millennial reign. For those of us that stay true during this time, we will serve him then and be kings and priests, as it says. Um, but that's a digression again. The point is, they stayed true to the calendar, which was never contested by our Mashiach, and he kept the proper calendar himself, and he never said that the apostate Pharisees or Sadducees or anyone was on the wrong date for the Pesach or for any feast. It literally mentions in the apostolic constitutions that it was not until after they had rejected the truth, and it was when they were writing those writings before the destruction of the temple, that the Yahudim that rejected him were starting to go apostate in everything, even the keeping of the calendar, which anyone who knows today, they follow a fixed cycle, mathematical equivalent to the lunar calendar. It's not even following the moon or per se, as far as I'm aware. But that phenomenon's also talked about, and we cover that, I believe, in Gad the Seer chapter 1. In Gad the Seer's vision, we go into detail about it because it has the lamb get put on the moon. And the moon's significance in the vision makes sense when you comprehend it in relation to the kingdom. It goes all the way back to the parable from the creation account and the numbers of creation and what was made. The sun, moon, and stars line up with our Mashiach, the bridegroom, preaching the kingdom and setting up his assemblies, the children of light running the courses set before them. Right? So the moon being the kingdom, you can find paralleled in a lot of different sections there, but including here where the moon's horns were pointing down, and there was two of them that were low at that time at the advent of our Mashiach. If you're familiar with what's in Josephus about this time after the Maccabees had gained power, they had removed Antiochus and they were reigning for a while. Their children started to go apostate from the truth. And shortly before the advent of our Mashiach, two brothers were contesting for the throne. And it was like the moon with the two horns pointing down. It was a dishonorable thing going on. But the contrivances between them ended up having them both be removed. And that was when Herod came to prominence through his father Antipas and what he had done, really. But we'll get to that in the course of time. Either way, the point of the moon being the kingdom, when you have that as a connection there and you see it very clearly, a lot of the other parables make sense. And a lot of things that you can see, phenomenon that you can see even today, start to make a little more sense. Like the blood crescent moon at the coronation of the current monarch of Britain, and how there was a lunar eclipse at the beheading of, I believe it was that one of the Charleses before him. There is also the four blood moons at the time where the the intern president between this one, I think it was Joe Biden, who swore an oath on the Jesuit Bible when he came to office here. There was four blood moons in relation to when he came to office, if I remember correctly. And these have an effect. They're signs for us if we only know what they mean. But back on track here. It says, and you shall boil and roast and eat it in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose, and you shall return in the morning and go to your house. 6 days shall you eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day is a festival or a Sabbath. It says holiday here. And right here it says the seventh day shall be a solemn assembly or etzara, right? A feast to Yahuwah your Elohim. You shall do, or you shall not do in it any work, save what must be done by anyone, meaning the food that you prepare for yourself and whatnot. 7 weeks shall you number to yourself when you shall begin the sickle to the corn or wheat. You shall begin to number 7 weeks. I'm sorry. When you put the sickle to the abib barley, they call it corn here. But after you do first fruits, you count 7 weeks, which is the 50th day, and then you have Shavuot, which would be the 15th of the third month there. And you shall keep the feast of weeks to Yahuwah your Elohim, accordingly, as your hand has power in as many things as Yahuwah your Elohim shall give you. Now that means that you just do. If you have the barley, you are to give the first fruits of it, whether it's in its head, green or otherwise, the way it describes. When you have the wheat, you are to give the bread, the two leavened loaves, as it mentions there. You're to participate with that by giving your first fruits, your tenth of all, whatever that portion is. If you have it, you give it. That was how it worked. If you didn't have it, you couldn't give it, right? But you were supposed to, like, if you lived too far away and you had any of your offerings or anything that you had at that time that you wanted to give, you would sell it, take the money in hand and go. And that's where it mentions that you would get whatever your being desires and you would rejoice before him. And that was the purpose. That the intent was to be grateful for the people, and the intent overtly, like the larger scheme of things, was to have the people prepared and trained to be there and present for him when he was there so he can teach them when he came physically, right? That's gone over in the recognitions of Clement very clearly, right there in book 1, where Keph is explaining to Clement all of history before their times and the reasons for things generally, which we've already read before on this channel. If you want to go back and scroll through the scripture studies playlist, eventually you'll hit the recognitions of Clement, but we'll read them again in the course of time as well. It says, and you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter, your manservant and your maidservant, and the Luiim and the stranger, and the orphan, and the widow which dwells among you, in whatsoever place Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose, that his name should be called there. And wherever he allows his name or permits or causes his name to be remembered, there he will come and bless us. Excuse me. It says, and you shall remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and you shall observe and do these commands. You shall keep for yourself the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, when you gather in from your corn floor and your winepress, and you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter and your manservant and your maidservant and the Luiim and the stranger and the orphan and the widow that is in your cities. 7 days shall you keep a feast to Yahuwah your Elohim, in the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose for himself. And if Yahuwah your Elohim shall bless you in all your fruits, and in every work of your hands, then you shall rejoice. If, then, right? But that's if you're walking in truth. That's the same thing that mentions in the Apostolic Constitutions where it says that true joy can only come about by taking hold of the truth that comes down out of the Shamayim and knowing that you're partaking of it honestly, right? The one doing it has comprehension, but you can rejoice in truth and have true joy because you're doing the things that he said that are pleasing, and you know you have eternal expectation. When you have that kind of confidence and you're not convicted in your mind of doing anything that is presumptuously a sin, that's when you have boldness toward Elohim, and everything you ask will be given you, especially if you ask in belief and not doubt. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before Yahuwah your Elohim in the place which Yahuwah shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. And you shall not appear before Yahuwah your Elohim empty. Each one according to his ability, according to the blessing of Yahuwah your Elohim, which he has given you. You shall make for yourself judges and officers in your cities, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you in your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment, with Zadik judgment. There is a part in the Proverbs where it talks about, I believe it's in Proverbs 8, where he says, I love those who love me. Or no, not that part. He says, I'm with the princes and the nobles, it usually has in almost every translation of English, it says all the judges of the earth. But if you look at the Hebrew, that of the earth does not exist there. It literally says all the Zadik Shafotim, or all the righteous judges. That's literally the ones that he is with. Not every judge, because the ones that are unrighteous are tyrants. They're usurpers of the position. They're not actually doing what his will is. But all the people that judge with righteous judgment are the ones that have equal weights and measures. The ones that do his will are the righteous judges that he is with. It says, and you shall not wrest judgment, nor favor persons, nor receive a gift, for gifts blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. You shall justly pursue justice, that you may live and go in and inherit the land, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you. You shall not plant for yourself a grove. You shall not plant for yourself any tree near the altar of your Elohim. You shall not set up for yourself a pillar, which Yahuwah your Elohim hates. Any image, matzabah, matzabah, right? Column, stone, idol, and they call it a pillar there. But he hates them. Right? Chapter 17. Things sacrificed must be sound, idolaters must be slain. And this is the same thing. Adultery is like idolatry. The spiritual is a representative of the physical. Hard controversies are to be determined by the Kohanim and judges. The contemner of that determination must die, the election and duty of a king. It says, you shall not sacrifice to Yahuwah your Elohim a calf or a sheep in which there is a blemish, any evil thing, for it is an abomination to Yahuwah your Elohim. And this is another phenomenon of the spiritual being represented in a physical first. You have the offerings, the sacrifices of our Mashiach, the sacrifices of Elohim and different animals that are considered clean, and none of them are to be blemished. This is a type of the martyrs, which we've talked about. There was many, many, many offerings at the dedication of the temple, just like there were many martyrs at the spiritual dedication of his temple when our Mashiach came and died. There's a lot of parallels in such a fashion. Just to keep that in mind. Okay. Oh, in the contrast to that, you also have the enemies of the truth where they twist everything. They pervert these things and they'll spiritualize the literal and literalize the spiritual. One example in this, for instance, is, and I just learned this, I did not know it before recently, but there is a video from a gentleman from Chick Publications. And if you're familiar with them, Chick Publications they used to do Chick tracts, little booklets that they would be given out for converting people to believe. It was Chick Publications that made a lot of booklets that helped promote or share what John Todd was talking about when he came to the truth. And they have a lot of information about Westcott and Hort and a few things that I've really appreciated, although I've not been intimately familiar with them. They also produced different books that I've never found anywhere else, including 50 Years in the Church of Rome and
Alberto.
Edmund Paris's The Secret History, Alberto Rivera's writings as well. Thank you, brother. And these are only published, as far as I know, with Chick Publications. So one of the lead editors or the gentleman that worked with them today, I can't remember his name. He had a video he's just talking not too long ago. But he mentioned that he would never be accepted as a Jesuit because he has a physical blemish, he has a birthmark around his eye. And they require perfection, just like the priest, the Kohen here. If you remember, there's laws, physical ones, they could be without blemish. And one of the things during the dispute between the two sons of the Maccabees that were fighting, that lost the kingdom to Herod, when they were disputing, one of the brothers cut off the ears, or was it the ears or the nose? He cut off one of the facial parts of, I believe it was the nose of his brother, who was the high Kohen, so he would never be able to serve again because he now had a blemish. But the laws are physical to teach the spiritual that we should not be blemished ourselves. But the enemy of the truth hyper literalizes, they flip things around. And all Jesuits are required to be without any blemish at all. Which again, I just recently learned that, but that's another perversion of it. It's another twisting, just like you have the parts where it mentions here in Deuteronomy and elsewhere that you're to bind his commands on your arm and write them on the tablet of your heart or put them as frontlets between your eyes. These are meant to be keeping them in mind and doing them, not, but they're taken as physical, literal things by those that have rejected the truth. I'm not trying to be confrontational here. I'm just pointing out parallels that people can see. Right here it says, if there should be found in any one of your cities, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you, a man or a woman who shall do that which is evil before Yahuwah your Elohim, so as to transgress his covenant, and they should go and serve other Elohim and worship them, the sun or the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which he commanded you not to do. Now, the first thing worshipped after he was rejected was the sun. When you read that Sanchonito's Phoenician history, it mentions that specifically, that the second born of Protogeneus, or Cain, who came from Adam, first looked up to the sun and venerated him as Baal Shemen, or the Lord of the heavens. And that's the first one here you see that is prohibited. But it says, the sun or the moon or any of the host of heaven, which he commanded you not to do. Now that I'm thinking about it real quick, and I don't mean to keep doing this, but these are important things. That connection with the kingdom and the moon, too. One parallel that you can see is that those who tend to venerate men, or what men have told them over the word of Elohim, tend to venerate the moon. You see it in the Greeks first, in the Babylonians first, actually, where they do Molech worship. They deify man, and they are worshiping men, and they also had a lunar calendar. That was picked up by the Greeks, and it was picked up by the Yahudim that rejected the truth, and they follow after the traditions of men that they put over them. In the same way, that the Catholicism, or the judgment against the nations, is that they are given to the whole host of the heavens to worship, which is the sun, moon, and all the stars. And we find that is the very system that is set up within Catholicism, where they are over sun worshippers who venerate a man over everything. And remember, they start their calendar based off of, they say it's the sun, but really it's the whole host of the heavens, because they have a calendar based off the stars. But then they follow their first day of Easter, not Passover, which is based off of the moon, and then they call it all for the sun, right? So they actually worship the entire host as it's mentioned there. But that's a digression. My point is showing that in the ways that you err, he puts that back, and it's shown in the things that you end up venerating and how you're chastised by him. If you look at all the plagues of Egypt, they correlate directly to the disgusting things that they worshipped and venerated over the truth. When you look at the corrections of different peoples in different times, it almost inevitably will bring back their own ways against them. When Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a tree being cut off and the stump growing up from it, that was a very picture of the paganism that they had going on, that we carried down with the Yule log and the Christmas tree, where the king, or the mighty one, was cut down and reborn, with Nimrod being like the Pharaoh being the rebirth of the sun deity. Nimrod was the rebirth, or Tammuz was the rebirth of the one that died, kind of thing. That was that picture. And then he had it brought back on him. When the Byzantines worshipped the horse and they venerated the power of their scorpion crossbows, they had the long-haired horses from the Mongol hordes coming after them with the firearms that destroyed them, just as it foretold these kind of things would happen, right? The triads of judgments that have been going on because of the Trinity worship and things like that are a direct correlation too. But again, that's another thing for another time. I'm only trying to show you there's multiple parallels where you can see that it's what he said, it's a fact that happened in scripture, and it's an evident thing that you can see again and again and again. So we should really fear him, be mindful of the truth. And this is why he says, look, those who draw near to me must be set apart. We can't fake it. When you try to bring strange fire, it's going to consume you. If you come at him with error, it does not end well for you. But that's why he's in his loving kindness put intercessors, mediators, those that um, have been closer or are able to share and not have the people suffer. Because if you recall, he is love, and that's the whole thing we have to keep in mind. When you work at that premise, everything makes sense. He says, "And you shall serve other mighty ones and worship them, the sun and the moon, or any of the host of the heavens, which he commanded you not to do. And it be told you, and you shall have inquired diligently." You investigate what you don't know, you have a trial, right? "And behold, the thing really took place. This abomination has been done in Israel. Then shall you bring out that man or that woman, and you shall stone them with stones, and they shall die. And he shall die on the testimony of two or three witnesses. A man is put to death, shall not be put to death for one witness." And this is something that I've mentioned before. This is why I have the premise of everything, absolutely everything in his word that we are going to be judged for. You have to be able to prove with multiple witnesses, as he said, you must establish it. When you do that, then you can be firm on the things you ought to be keeping and the things you ought to be refraining from forcing or keeping. If something only has one witness, it is not something that you will be judged for by his own standard, and he cannot lie. So if he's not going to judge you for what there's only one witness for, most assuredly we should not judge ourselves or others for that thing. Now, this means that, every place that you can find, and there are many more than two, that talk about the sacredness of his name, the fact that it is unique, we are to call upon it, praise it, worship it, the contrast between calling on others. You can find all of that in his word. To continue to willfully not use his name would be to willfully disobey or ignore all those things, all those testimonies and witnesses to the validity of the third commandment. You shall not bring my name to not ruin falsehood or a lie, because he will not purify or cleanse the one who does that. Right? And that's just an example. You can really do it with anything. I'm not nitpicking on his name. It's just that's an example that we literally have thousands of witnesses to on the importance of his name. And yet it's something that quite often is callously disregarded. Some things we only have one witness to in the Bible, but you'll have the other corroborating witnesses in things that were from the Dead Sea Scrolls or Apocrypha. I consider that just as valid, but if someone has not seen it, it's not held against them. That's the important thing to keep in mind. It says, "And the hand of the witnesses shall be upon him the first to put him to death, and the hand of the people at the last, so shall you remove the evil one from among yourselves." Right? And I keep saying this about our country too, and I'm not trying to be rude or digress too much here, but it's the same principle. The rules in scripture for someone who is a traitor to their nation is to hang them from high noon until sunset, right? Because they're cursed. Um, that was the same punishment that was given in law for our country for traitors, because our our law was built upon the Bible. The common law is scripture, practically applied. But that's been changed over time. However, if you want to have the benefit of it being applicable, you have to do the thing. And I guarantee everybody, if you started hanging traitors that were actually committing treason, the ones that were doing it would stop immediately. They would no longer be wanting to be culpable for such things. But when there's no fear of punishment, there's license to sin, right? And if the matter shall be too hard for you in judgment, between blood and blood, and between cause and cause, and between stroke and stroke, and between contradiction and contradiction, matters of judgment in your cities, then you shall arise and go up to the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose, and you shall come to the Kohanim, the Luiim, and to the judge who shall be in those days, and they shall search out and report the judgment to you. And you shall act according to the thing which they shall report to you out of the place which Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose, and you shall observe to do all whatsoever shall have been by law appointed to you. By law, not by whatever they tell you, right? But they sit in Moshe's seat, so listen to him, right? Whatever Moshe told you to do. You shall do according to the law and to the judgment which they shall declare to you. You shall not swerve to the right hand or to the left from any sentence which they shall report to you. And the man whosoever shall act in haughtiness, so as not to hearken to the Kohen who stands to minister in the name of Yahuwah your Elohim, or the judge who shall preside in those days, that man shall die, and you shall remove the evil one out of Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear, and shall no more commit impiety. And when you shall enter into the land which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you, and shall inherit and dwell in it, and shall say, I will set a ruler over me, so also, or as also the other nations round about me. You shall surely set over you the ruler whom Yahuwah Elohim shall choose. Of your brethren you shall set over you a ruler. You shall not have power to set over you a stranger, because he is not your brother. For he shall not multiply to himself horses, and he shall by no means turn the people back to Egypt, lest he should multiply to himself horses. For Yahuwah said, You shall not any more turn back by that way. And he shall not multiply to himself wives, lest his heart turn away, and he shall not greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And when he shall be established in his government, then shall he write for himself this repetition of the law into a book by the hands of the Kohanim, the Luiim. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may, you see here, every day, if you're not reading his word or studying scripture daily, you're not really doing the thing of a king, which not everyone is meant to be a king, but we're enjoined to speak of these things as we rise up, as we lie down, and as we go in the way. So in the morning, in the evening, all during the course of our day. We're to meditate on his words continually so that we have them in mind. We seek to do what's profitable and we're successful and we have comprehension in all things. When you have other things in your mind, that's turning away from the words of life. It's not something that I like to contemplate very often, although it happens to me on occasion. Um, it's never pleasant for me, right? It mentions in Kepha, in the recognitions, sorry, it mentions in the recognitions of Clement a chapter called The Life of the Nazarene, and I really appreciated it when I read it. I think to be able to practice that out in complete honesty would be an amazing thing, where you have your mind always settled on the truth and working out his ways and his thoughts in your own life. But I'm not quite there yet. It says that he may learn to fear Yahuwah your Elohim and to keep all these commandments and to observe these ordinances, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, that he depart not from the commandments on the right hand or on the left, that he and his sons may reign long in his dominion among the children of Yisrael. We see the example of how this doesn't work out so well. First for Shaul. And in the apostolic constitutions, it mentions that when the people wanted a king, they first wanted tyrants for themselves. They said, let us have like all the nations do. And all the nations had tyranny. They had man made rules and laws. They had a man just doing whatever his whim was to them, and they were pleased with it. And that angered Yahuwah. You saw, or if you remember, and if you don't remember, we're going to be reading it in the course of time here. But for anyone who's read 1st and 2nd Shemuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, or the beginnings of this thing, when they first asked for a monarch, it did not go over well for them. They were given instructions about how they would be mistreated and their stuff would be used, and they wanted it anyways. So it was given to them. But right here, Shaul, the first king, did not follow. His heart was not true. He did not keep the commandments, and he was rejected. The Ruach of Yahuwah was taken from him. Unclean spirits plagued him. And you can see the course of his train wreck of a life in the scriptures as we'll go along with it. In contrast to that, Dawid was the man after his own heart who was obedient. And even when he did sin, he was penitent. He asked to fall into Yahuwah's hand and to be forgiven, and he was. So he was willing to reform and renounce his sins and not continue in them, which is the contrast of what Shaul was incapable of. But one thing I want to mention here before we continue, this directly prohibits multiplying wives and doing things that you see both Dawid and then later Shlomo, his son, are said to have done. Shlomo was corrected for it. It actually mentions in a different place that if a king accumulates wives, they'll turn his heart away to follow after their mighty ones, and it will, yeah, see, and he shall not multiply wives, lest his heart turn away, and he shall not greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. The fact is that it was foretold if he multiplied wives, then it would happen. But you see that that was not the case with Dawid directly, although it was through wanting a wife that was not his own that there was a sin that turned his heart away, and then that later echoed in his children here. But the direct prohibition was not ever mentioned in relation to him. The reason why was mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is part of the exhortation from the Damascus document, and it directly mentions that the book of the law here was hidden in the Ark of the Covenant, which Ron Wyatt testifies that is still there. But the book of the law was hidden in the Ark of the Covenant, and it was not available for Dawid to read. It only came out when Zadok became High Kohen during the reign of Shlomo. And that was one of the evidences that we have the difference between nescience, not being able to know something, and ignorance, choosing not to know a thing. Anyone who chooses to remain ignorant of a thing they could know that would save them from doing something wrong are going to be judged as if they knew and chose not to. That's gone over in the recognitions of Clement by Kepha in quite a bit of detail. But you can't claim ignorance for a thing when you choose not to look at it for your own soul's benefit. And that's why the watchman on the wall scenario is given. You sound the alarm, you show the truth of these things and where it's at, and the blood isn't on your hands. You will no longer be culpable for what they do with it. If they choose to reject the truth, that's not your fault. If they choose to sleep while the sounding of the alarm's going on, it's not your fault if the enemy plunders them, right? But if you don't sound the alarm, then it is your fault. That's the contrast, right? So to continue here, It says, and when he shall have be, or, and when he shall be established in his government, then he shall write for himself this repetition of the law into a book by the hands of the Kohanim, the Luiim, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahuwah your Elohim, and to keep all these commandments, and to observe these ordinances, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, that he depart not from the commandments on the right hand or on the left, and that he and his sons may reign along in his dominion among the children of Israel. Sorry, I'd read that already before. One of the things that I've learned about repetition is in memorization is you remember things easier by repeating them, obviously. But when you learn in multiple methods, there's kinesthetic, like writing it out. There's auditorial, hearing someone speak it. And then there's the visual, seeing it for yourself. And when you have all three of those, it helps you to retain it the best. So, in doing those things, he's helping in his part, instilling his word into the mind of the king for that king and all the people's benefit. Chapter 18 says, Yahuwah is the Kohen's and Luiim's inheritance. The Kohen's due, the Luiim's portion. The abominations of the nations are to be avoided. Mashiach the foreteller is to be heard. The presumptuous foreteller is to die. And it says, the Kohanim, the Luiim, even the whole tribe of Lui, shall have no part nor inheritance with Yisrael. The burnt offerings of Yahuwah are their inheritance. They shall eat them. And they shall have no inheritance among their brethren. Yahuwah himself, his portion, as he said to him. And this is the due of the Kohanim in the things coming from the people for those, or from those who offer sacrifices, whether it be a calf or a sheep, and you shall give the shoulder to the Kohen, and the cheeks, and the great intestine. And the first fruits of your corn, Abib, sorry, and of your wine, and of your oil, you shall give to him the first fruits of the fleeces of your sheep. Because Yahuwah has chosen him out of all your tribes to stand before Yahuwah your Elohim, to minister and bless in his name, himself and his sons among the children of Yisrael. And if a Luiim come from one of the cities of all the children of Yisrael, where he himself dwells, accordingly as his mind desires, to the place which he shall have chosen, he shall minister to the name of Yahuwah his Elohim, as all his brethren the Luiim, who stand there present before Yahuwah your Elohim. He shall eat an allotted portion, besides the sale of his hereditary property. So the same thing that you see Barnabas doing in the renewed covenant, where he sold his property and he laid it at the feet of the emissaries there, and then he was taking part as a minister for the truth. He immediately became apostle. All the gifts of Elohim are not to be repented of, and the Luiim, the Levites, if you will, were given to be the ministers of the people, the servants of the people. And while that was a microcosm in the land for those who would join unto him, and it's not specifically one family anymore, that particular family will always have a place in joining him. So they can always do that. It says, and when you shall have entered into the land which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you, you shall not learn to do according to the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found in you one who purges his son or his daughter with fire, one who uses divination, or who deals with omens and augury, a sorcerer employing incantation, one who and this is the thing that like the magicians employing incantation. They have spells where they have to do things. They have ingredients to use, certain things to say, hand gestures to make, drawings to do. They have to perform a ritual. It's not just a specific power that emanates from them or whatever. And that's the difference between originally what magic was doing during the time of Simon the magician, or even up to that time, and then the gift of the Ruach, where our Mashiach would speak and things happened, and he gave the power of healing in like manner to his taught ones and whatnot, right? As you can see in the renewed covenant. It was that very phenomenon that there was not all this ritual and incantations and whatnot that immediately wowed Simon the magician and brought him over to the belief, although he did not continue in it. But it says, one who has in him a divining spirit and observer of signs, questioning the dead. For everyone that does these things is an abomination to Yahuwah your Elohim. For because of these abominations, Yahuwah will destroy them from before your face. You shall be perfect before Yahuwah your Elohim. Now, it's not really going into detail because these are not pleasant things. And it mentions in the renewed covenant by Shaul that it's not even pleasant to think about what they do in secret. It's not even decent to think about what they do in secret. But the things that the enemy requires of his to have these kinds of powers are things that are directly prohibited throughout the Ten Commandments and all of Scripture, where he says, don't do this, the enemy requires it. And I don't want to go beyond that, but including doing everything that our Creator hates, which is why he was driving them out. And there was to be none to survive, right? A very important thing to keep in mind. It says, and you shall be perfect before Yahuwah your Elohim. That word perfect, again, is tamim, entire or complete, to have integrity. And the fullness of that, the definition of it, is in Psalm 19. I was just sharing with a brother about that a little bit this morning, but I believe it's Psalm, I'm going to find that real quick. Psalm 19, verses 14, or hold on, back up to verse 12. It says, who discerns mistakes? Declare me innocent from those that are secret. Also keep your servant back from presumptuous sins. Do not let them rule over me. Then I shall be perfect, tamim, and innocent of great transgression. And that's the very state that Abraham was in when our Mashiach was standing before him, and the Father spoke through him, saying, I am El Shaddai, walk you before me and be you perfect. And it was after that time where he made the covenant in his flesh, and the year later, he had his son Yitzhak, the quote unquote promised seed type. But that was after he had gotten all the presumptuous sins out of his life, and he was walking perfectly before our Maker. Something that is mentioned about cultivating your field before planting your seeds, and while we do it so carefully with farms and land, we should be doing it carefully with our own progeny. Its example is in Abraham. He's rooted out the inclination of evil and had Yitzhak, and then through you see that pattern in Yitzhak, and he had his sons in his older age, after his dispositions were or his temperaments were tamed, and then you can see the benefit in his children from it. That doesn't always play out, but the idea of getting your heart right before passing it down into your children is a real thing. They call it epigenetics in science. It's called generational curses in Hebrew or in the scriptures. says, "For all these nations whose land you shall inherit, they will listen to omens and divinations. But Yahuwah your Elohim has not permitted you so. Yahuwah your Elohim shall raise up to you a foreteller of your brethren, like me. Him you shall hear. According to all things which you did desire of Yahuwah your Elohim in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, We will not again hear the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim, and we will not any more see this great fire, and we shall not die. And Yahuwah said to me, They have spoken rightly all that they have said to you. I will raise up to them a foreteller of their brethren like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them as I shall command him. And whatever man shall not hearken to whatsoever words that foreteller shall speak in my name, I will take vengeance on him. But the foreteller whosoever shall speak impiously, or shall impiously speak in my name, a word which I have not commanded him to speak, and whosoever shall speak in the name of other mighty ones, other Elohim, the Elohim Achrim, that foreteller shall die. But if you shall say in your heart, How shall we know the word which Yahuwah has not spoken? Whatsoever words that foreteller shall speak in the name of Yahuwah, and they shall not come true, and not come to pass. This is the thing which Yahuwah has not spoken. That foreteller has spoken wickedly or presumptuously, you shall not spare him. All right. Chapter 19. Just one moment. All right, chapter 19. It says, The cities of refuge, the privilege thereof for the manslayer, the landmark is not to be removed. 2 witnesses at the least, the punishment of a false witness. It says, And when Yahuwah your Elohim shall have destroyed the nations which Elohim gives you, even the land, and you shall inherit them, and dwell in their cities and in their houses, you shall separate for yourself 3 cities in the midst of the land, or your land, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you. Take a survey of your way, and you shall divide the coasts of your land, which Yahuwah your Elohim apportions to you, into 3 parts, and there shall be there a refuge for every manslayer. And this shall be the ordinance of the manslayer, who shall flee thither and shall live. Whosoever shall have smitten his neighbor ignorantly, whereas he hated him not in times past. And whosoever shall enter with his neighbor into the thicket to gather wood, if the hand of him that cuts wood with the axe should be violently shaken, and the axe head falling off from the handle should light on his neighbor, and he should die, he shall flee to one of these cities and live. Lest the avenger of blood pursue after the slayer because his heart is hot, and overtake him, if the way be too long, and slay him, though there is to this man no sentence of death, because he hated him not in time past. Meaning he did not intend to murder him. It was an accidental death, if you will. An accidental death means it was by the contrivance of Yahuwah. It was his will the man should die in such a manner, but it was not the fault of the one who did it. It says, therefore,
Manslaughter.
right, we call it manslaughter, but even today, people can be punished for a crime that our Creator says they're innocent. So the judgments of today, the way we have in statutory law are perverted here. There's no city of refuge to go to, for example. And something like this, even if someone unintentionally had it, if it was their acts that had that, they would be liable for damages, where our Creator does no such thing here. But that's the difference between man-made laws and the Torah there. I never think anything beyond what he's said as a judgment is lawful. I think that when we do stuff in such a manner, we bring and we enforce that upon another, we curse ourselves. With the judgment you use, you judge yourself, right? That was one thing that I've mentioned a few times about the common law and trials by jury in our country. The same thing with the people, or like Shaul, when he was made king, and it was his judgment not to follow through with the commands of Yahuwah, and he did not put everyone under the ban that should have been, the judgment passed on to him and the people instead, because he did not do the thing he ought to. He suffered the consequences for it. Uh, but no, you're not wrong at all when you said that, though. Sorry. And it says, right here, and whosoever shall enter with his neighbor into the thicket, I already read that part. It says, therefore I charge you, saying, you shall separate for yourself 3 cities. And if Yahuwah shall enlarge your borders, as he sware to your fathers, and Yahuwah shall give to you all the land which he had, or which he said he would give to your fathers, if you shall hearken to do all these commands, which I shall charge you this day, to love Yahuwah your Elohim, to walk in all his ways continually, you shall add for yourself yet 3 cities to these cities, or to these 3. So innocent blood shall not be spilt in the land, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you to inherit, and there shall not be in you one guilty of blood. But if there should be in you a man hating his neighbor, and he should lie in wait for him, and rise up against him and smite him that he die, and he should flee to one of these cities, then shall the elders of his city send, and take him thence, and they shall deliver him into the hands of the avengers of blood, and he shall die. Your eye shall not spare him, so shall you purge innocent blood from Yisrael, and it shall be well with you. You shall not move the landmarks of your neighbor, which your fathers set in the inheritance, in which you have obtained a share in the land, which Yahuwah your Elohim gives you to inherit. One witness shall not stand to testify against a man for any iniquity, or for any fault, or for any sin which he may commit, by the mouth of 2 witnesses, or by the mouth of 3 witnesses, shall every word be established. And if an unrighteous witness rise up against a man, alleging iniquity against him, then shall the 2 men between whom the controversy is stand before Yahuwah, and before the Kohanim, and before the judges, who may be in those days. And the judges shall make diligent inquiry, and behold, the unrighteous witness has borne unrighteous testimony, and has stood up against his brother. Then shall you do to him as he wickedly devised to do against his brother, and you shall remove the evil from yourselves. And the rest shall hear and fear, and do no more according to this wicked or this evil thing in the midst of you. Your eyes shall not spare him, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Or, in other words, total equality, right? Tit for tat, as they say. You do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All right, I believe that's all we have for today. We have to wrap things up. So you have a great rest of your Sabbath, everyone. A great week ahead. Shabbat shalom, Shavua tov, and we will talk to you next time.